Kia ora koutou whānau, welcome back to another edition of Big Hairy News. Special edition tonight, it's pre-record fully. I am, as you see this, if you're watching this live, sitting in a theatre watching my 16-year-old and 13-year-old perform in the musical Rent. Do you know Rent? If you don't know Rent, I can show you Rent. Interesting musical. I think I'm someone who in my lifetime has spent a lot of time performing and enjoying musicals. And I have to say, obviously, incredibly proud of my kids doing a show. But the musical of Rent, probably the most overrated musical that there is. Why is it overrated? It was received incredibly well. The thing is, the guy who wrote it, Jonathan Larson, if you want to know his story, there's a movie on Netflix called Tick, Tick, Boom. And Tick, Tick, Boom is kind of the story of Jonathan Larson sort of writing Rent and some other shows that he did as well. The tragedy is Jonathan Larson was a bit of a musical prodigy and obviously a bit of a writing prodigy. And he ended up being, he strived to get on Broadway. He strived to kind of make it there and compete, maybe the wrong word for theatre, but to be accepted for his skill set and to be absolutely up playing with the big boys and girls and getting his show to the pinnacle of where it could go to. And one of the reasons I reckon Rent has had such a good reception by people, there's two reasons. One, it was from about the early 90s and it focused on the gay epidemic in the late 80s. So there was a social commentary to be had with it. But the second thing is Jonathan Larson died the night before the show was to premiere on Broadway. Like, he never got to see his creation get to the point of its pinnacle on Broadway because 24 hours before it was due to go on there, he died. And like that in and of itself is I think one of the reasons that it's so successful and so beloved, because of the story behind it. It's a little bit like, you may not know this, but the Mona Lisa, one of the reasons it's considered the most incredible painting in the world at the moment is not because it's the most incredible painting, but it's the story that goes with it. The Mona Lisa has been around for a long time, and it was considered a bit of a ho-hum painting for a while, and then it got stolen. And then that added to the narrative of the story. And then when it was recovered, it became the most famous painting in the world. And that then added to its cost, its expense, what it was worth. And so the narrative, the story behind the Mona Lisa is actually one of the reasons it's considered to be such a brilliant piece of artwork. Not that it's not brilliant, but it adds to it. And I think the incredible, tragic, sad story of Jonathan Larson behind Rent is one of the reasons that Rent has seen the success that it has seen. A huge thanks to all of our patrons who have come on board to support us. You might see that there's a bit of a difference with our patrons board tonight. There's been a few changes to people's platforms and levels, and people joining and people not joining. And a big welcome to Gary Charles. I think I mentioned Gary last night, but he wasn't on the board last night. Over here with our coffee runners, Gary is there down the bottom. Welcome to being a part of what we do, and thanks for coming on board. If you want to be a part of what we do, then what you can do is support us by heading to patreon.com/Big Hairy News and be a patron. There's many other ways that you can support us as well. You can support us by sharing the stuff that we do, sharing around the shows that we do. If clips come out, you can share those. And another big thing you can do, we talk about this often, is to be a part of our audio podcast. Bottom of the screen at the moment. If you want to get to our audio podcast, it's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. And subscribing, especially, but not exclusively, but especially to the Apple Podcast, helps us in the charts, helps us potentially gain more traction within the industry. And if we gain more traction within the industry, then we have more opportunity to get guests and various bits and pieces as well. So however you support us, we're very thankful to have you on board, whether it's watching us, whether it's telling people about us, whether it's listening to us, or whether it's like this, one of our fantastic patrons. We are very excited and very happy to have you on board. Okay, got a few stories to get through for you tonight. Going to be having a look at the Ron DeSantis launch of his presidential presidential run, which was an absolute debacle. Elon Musk looking like a fool. Ron DeSantis looking like a fool. Trying to launch it on Twitter. It turned into a massive advert for Twitter. And even though it was an advert for Twitter, as in, we love you, Elon, the Twitter technology crashed and burned and couldn't handle it. We'll have a look at that towards the end of the show. We're going to be having a look as if crime stats are up. Now, we talked about this last night, and we didn't take a position on whether they were up or not. So I thought we were talking about how Newshub was reporting it. I thought perhaps tonight what we should do is actually get an expert on. So we've got a criminologist coming up to talk to us about the actual crime stats at the moment, and to have a look at if they're up or if they're not, what the research shows versus what the media is saying. That'll be coming up shortly. But we're going to start the show tonight having a look at an item from TVNZ this morning. The government every year kind of comes out and says, hey guys, this is some ways you could save some power. And they did it again this year. But they're being roundly, the government that has been roundly criticised by groups involved with poverty advocacy, and also by the opposition, obviously, always by the opposition, about kind of, I don't know if it's being callous, but it's offering these things to save 5% on your power bill here and there when there's a cost of living crisis. I don't fully get it, because the alternative is a government not really offering any advice at all. But Consumer New Zealand also got involved in the conversation as to how to save power. And even though it's purely for them about here's some ways you can save power, they've sort of been dragged into it as well. Looking at TVNZ Breakfast this morning, they had a bit of a chat about it, and they had Consumer New Zealand on. So let's have a look to what they had to say.
Find money in weird places. That's the advice from the government when it comes to saving on your power bill this winter. Anti-poverty campaigners have called the campaign immoral and say Labor is out of touch. We invited Energy Minister Megan Woods onto the program this morning, but she refused to come on to defend the scheme. A sign perhaps the government is backpedalling on what was quickly criticised as a condescending and patronising campaign. Consumer New Zealand has long been critical of the big power companies, but joined on with the government in yesterday's recommendations. Their chief executive, John Duffy, joins us now. Morena, John, how did you get tangled up in this campaign?
Well, Anna, we're in a cost of living crisis, as you well know, and we were attracted to this campaign because it provides New Zealanders with quick, low cost or no cost, easy ways of saving some money on their power bill, which makes up a significant portion of household costs. So,
seems to make sense. Consumer New Zealand going, hey guys, here's how you can save a little bit of money. We will do the consumer work for you.
we thought it was a good thing. It's been quite disappointing to see some of the reaction to that has missed the point that this isn't an excuse for how the electricity market is functioning. That's a separate debate. This is some advice to consumers to help them manage their household costs through what is usually the most expensive time for power consumption during the year.
You talk about missing the point, but it's been criticised by anti-poverty campaigners on the left and opposition parties on the right. So,
well, the opposition parties on the right, not necessarily such a big deal that they're going to criticise it. But the poverty campaigners, I mean, you got to say, if the poverty campaigners are the people working with the people who this advice is supposed to target, are saying, hey guys, you're missing the mark, listen to them for sure.
Isn't it the people running this campaign that have missed the point? They've read the room really wrong.
Well, if you have a close look at the detail of the campaign, what it's saying is New Zealanders, shop around for your power. So it's very similar to what Adrian Orr was saying on your show just before. If you're worried about the cost of your power bill, one of the best and quickest and easiest and free things that you can do is compare what you're paying with what other companies are offering. And for the most part, when users use the comparison site PowerSwitch, they can save on average $385 a year. Now that's a meaningful amount of money for many households.
Okay, but we also had Toast Electric on this morning who say that some of these people who are in poverty for their power use should not be reducing their power consumption, they should be increasing it. They live in cold, drafty homes. This is the antithesis of what we should be telling these people. Yep.
Very, very good point. Vulnerable, elderly, people who are living in cold, drafty, wet homes. We've all heard stories of pensioners in particular, living through winter in their bedroom because they can only afford to heat one room of their house. So fantastic point. Completely fair criticism that we shouldn't be telling people to use less power. We should be telling people save power if it's wasted. If you've got 12 televisions in your house, you're probably not worried about power anyway. You might only need one of them on. But if it comes down to saving some power and people take that to meaning saving heating, then that will make people sicker and be worse in the long run. That's not the help government should be giving consumers.
Yeah, so there's a lot more detail that sits in behind the headlines, and actually what we're recommending here is that people use their appliances more efficiently. For example, getting their heat pumps set to the right and most efficient setting for the size of the house that they're trying to heat, if indeed they have a heat pump. So we're not in any way promoting people compromising on their power use. We're actually trying to help them save money so that they can stretch that power bill through the winter so that they can heat their homes and have a safe and warm home.
No, this is asking people to compromise. It's asking people to use cold washers, to turn down the heat pump temperature, to turn appliances off. I mean, how far does that go? Are you supposed to turn off the fridge? To be fair, John, they're not even weird places, so I don't even understand why it's called find money in weird places. They're not weird. It's just the heat pump.
Well, obviously, the catch line has resonated with you, so it's got some cut through. And if
not in a great way.
If you're looking at the difference between putting food on the table and paying your power bill, putting your washing machine onto a cold wash or having a shorter shower is a really good option.
Yeah, it's probably a bit unfair here what the reporter is doing, because like what the consumer CEO is saying is, like, for example, this is how we run our house, right? Just so you know, so you give you an idea, living in a colder climate down in Dunedin, my heat pump goes on in about April to 18 degrees and it goes off in October, November, and it stays on 18 the whole time. And that just takes the chill off. We have a fire as well. And so on the colder days, which is most days from now through winter, we have the fire going as well. But the best way to use a heat pump, as an example, is at a constant average temperature, not getting up in the morning and having a cold room and whacking it on 24 and then turning it off when you go to work and then coming home and whacking it on 24 again to heat the house up. It's to put it on 16, 17, 18 and keep it consistent all the way through. When I go to bed, I typically put it down to 17, and then when I get up, I typically put it to 18 or 19, and it just stays like that all winter. So the advice to give away or to turn your heat pumps down might mean that. And if that's what it means, then that's fine. If it's mean you shouldn't try and have your heat pump on 19, you should always have it on 16, that's not acceptable. And I guess that's what the guy from Consumer is saying. That's the sort of, he didn't quite say the devil is in the details, but that's what he's saying, is the behind the headlines is what there is that really matters. And to be honest, hot wash versus cold wash in the washing machine, I don't think that's too big of a deal either. And to be honest with you, I think most people most of the time can do a cold wash. We do in our household, not that we're the example, but hot washes on things like underwears and socks and that kind of stuff where there can be smelly bacteria, but cold wash for everything else. So if someone's using a hot wash for everything, then they can save some power there. So it really does depend how it's meant, how it's communicated. Now, this government's been bad at communication on lots of things. Maybe they've communicated this badly as well. And what it actually means for the consumer in the end.
If you're faced with those really difficult choices about how far to stretch your household income.
If the message isn't being received by the public or by campaign groups or by other politicians about how it should have been and the intention that you say it came with, and it's been marketed wrong, do you regret getting involved in this?
Stupid question.
No, not at all. Because
does Consumer New Zealand regret getting involved in offering advice to consumers in New Zealand? Stupid question. Sorry.
See that there's a really beneficial outcome here for New Zealanders. You know, if this campaign is designed to reach 1 million people, if even 1% of those people follow the advice that we've put out here, that's a $7 million saving. We would hope that a lot more people do and are able to follow that advice. And there could be many millions of dollars saved by New Zealanders this winter, and that money they can use for other things in their household expenses that are just as essential as power.
But why are we punting this problem onto consumers when this is an industry, power industry, that makes $1 billion profit?
Fair question.
Yeah, and that's a really good and separate question, and I'm not shying away from the fact that...
But again, that's not Consumer New Zealand's job. Consumer New Zealand's job is to be advocates and to give advice to consumers, not to figure out how to regulate the power companies. Fair question. The right question, the payoff New Zealanders need to see is about the super profits, whether it be at banks, power companies or supermarkets, but that's not Consumer New Zealand's role. Their role is to give advice to consumers.
The power industry is not necessarily working beneficially for consumers. We know from great work that the Electricity Authority has done last year that big users of electricity like aluminium smelters and potentially steel mills are able to negotiate cheap prices for electricity, and that those cheap prices are being subsidised by consumers. So this is in no way excusing how the electricity market is functioning. This is about putting practical steps in front of people that they can do right now at low cost to save money on their power bill.
Agreed.
It's a contradiction though, isn't it, John? Because the people who can afford it will just pay the bill. They're probably not going to really engage with this campaign. And the people who really need to save that money can't actually afford to, because they are more likely to be in homes that need heating, where they are cold and drafty.
Yeah, this is where Anna Burns-Fraser is now missing the point, because she's for some reason got in her head that Consumer New Zealand is telling people to turn the thermostat down. That's not what they're saying. The example I just gave about the heat pump, if you've got it set too high, run it in a better, more efficient way, which is actually warmer as well. People don't know that. It's a little bit like when you see a big, massive, truck pull into a petrol station to fill up their diesel tanks. They don't turn the car off. They don't turn the cab off. And the only reason they don't do that is because turning it off and starting it again uses far more fuel in the big Mac, or the Mac truck, than it does to leave it running. It's the same with heat pumps. To leave it running on a low, consistent, keep the house warm all the time is better. So I think, unfortunately, Anna Burns-Francis has got the wrong end of the stick here, because I don't think this is the advice. They're not saying less power, less power, less power. They're saying, use your power more smartly. And if you've got your thermostat set to, thermostat's sort of an American idea, but, for your heat pump to 25, then set it to 20 and that'll be absolutely fine. And the other thing that we can do as consumers, we all should do this to save power, I think, well, if you have a budget, that is rather than turning your heat pump from sort of 19 to 22, the first thing you do is maybe put on another layer of clothes. Like I've got a merino top, which is old and ratty, but it's my around home top. And so if I'm feeling a bit, not chilly, but you can feel that it's not quite warm enough, the first thing you do is you put the hoodie on or you put the jersey on. The second thing you do is turn the heat pump up. So I think it's more of a mindset than a demand by Consumer New Zealand for people to use less power or to turn the heat down.
To take these money-saving tips.
Even if those tips around reducing consumption are not possible for everybody, people can still hop onto Power Switch and check that they're on the right plan for them. Check that they're not paying too much. That's absolutely free to do, and that's open to everybody with a power connection.
Have you had any discussions with the office of Megan Woods since the campaign launched yesterday and the feedback that's being received?
No, we haven't.
Will you?
Look, it may come up. We don't necessarily have a direct line into the minister, so we would be talking with the Electricity Authority and ECA, who through Warmer Kiwi Homes are our partners on this.
John, who came up with the tips?
Those were generated by Consumer NZ.
Okay, and when you thought of them and when they came up, what was the consideration that was given to the cost of living crisis and actually that people just don't have any money and can't afford the sky-high rent and the lack of insulation that they have and all the wider problems rather than the 5-minute shower?
Well, those are all really relevant considerations to the fact that power bills, along with grocery bills and fuel and rent, are all putting pressure on households. I'm not really sure I follow your line of questioning in the sense that we're offering tips to help people save money, to help them deal with the cost of living crisis and all the pressures that are on households. So if people are able to follow these tips, they should be, on average, be able to save up to $500 a year on their power bill, and help them cope with the cost pressures on their households.
And look, I think that's the fairest way to wrap up there. He says, if you are able to follow these tips, if this is not a demand, it just probably is incumbent on me to also now actually show you what some of the tips actually are. This is from a Newshub article talking about Kiwi launches campaign to help Kiwi save money on power bills. Tips are things like checking you're on the best power plan for you and your whānau, that's everybody. Switching off appliances at the wall when you're not using them. Anna Burns-Francis again, like, what, we're going to turn off the fridge? No, that's like, I don't know about you, but on my bench in my kitchen, there's about 8 appliances always plugged in. If your appliance is plugged in, it's drawing power. They don't have to be on if you don't want them to be. Setting your heat pump to a maximum of 21 degrees, that's sort of what we talked about here. I mean, ours is on 19 and it just sits here the whole time. Changing your washing machine settings to cold wash and shortening your showers to 5 minutes. None of those, I don't believe, none of those tips are actually, vulnerable people are now going to end up in hospital by getting so sick, which is sort of the vibe from that interview, what it was. And I think perhaps is sort of the vibe that's been picked up on by some people, because none of those things, checking on your best power plan, switching off appliances if you're not using them or not, checking your heat pump levels, which is what we talked about earlier, changing your washing machine settings to cold, or shortening your showers a bit. I mean, even if you thought about shortening my shower by 10 or 20%, if you have a 6-minute shower, make it 5. If you have a 10-minute shower, make it 8. It's going to make a difference. It might be a small difference, but it's going to make a difference. Right, let's move on. A pre-recorded, well, this is all pre-recorded. This is a pre-recorded conversation. We talked last night about the Newshub's reporting on crime stats, and my biggest concern with what I was seeing from Newshub was actually they were using the crime stats about crimes being reported, and then they were challenging the fact that that was actually the crimes being committed. And we said last night, you know, and I'm not saying I had the numbers exactly, but I said last night, if 100 crimes happened and 40 got reported, and then the following year 100 crimes happened and 60 got reported, then that's not an increase in crime. That's an increase in the crime being reported. Now, last night we took a really clear position that we weren't taking a position because we didn't have the facts and figures about was crime on the increase or not. But what we did know is that Newshub were misrepresenting the data that they were using, because they were using the data from the police that said the reporting of crime is up, and they were stating that crime is up. Now, it might sound like a splitting hairs to you, but to me, it's quite massive difference. If the reporting of crime is up, that doesn't necessarily mean that crime is up. Crime might be up, but it doesn't necessarily mean it. And so last night we made it very clear we weren't taking a position on that. And so what I thought we'd do is we'd get to someone who might know a bit better than us, which is a lot of people, about this. So we went to Victoria University and we got ourselves a criminologist. His name is Dr. Trevor Bradley. He's a PhD in criminology. And he joined me earlier this afternoon to talk about the crime stats and to talk about if crime in New Zealand is going up or not. I want to welcome to the show criminologist, a PhD in criminology, a senior lecturer at the School of Social and Cultural Studies at Victoria University, Dr. Trevor Bradley. Trevor, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Kia ora, welcome.
Now, last night we had a conversation, and I know you've seen a bit of the clip, around Newshub reporting on the police crime snapshot. Now, the police crime snapshot, in fact, I pulled it up earlier, I'll go find it in a minute, basically says the police crime snapshot report that comes out talks about crimes being reported, victims reporting crime. Newshub last night sold it as crimes happening. In other words, the crime rate has gone up significantly. We're hearing the national opposition at the moment act as well, talking about, you know, this current government being soft on crime. And for those of us who are kind of plebs in the middle, who are hearing one thing from one side and different things from another side, and then reading something different, it's really important, especially this year being an election year, for us to know the truth. So we didn't take a position last night on whether crime was up or down. We just sort of pointed out that the way Newshub was reporting it was saying that they're saying crime is up, but they were using research that was talking about how people report crime to make that assumption or that conclusion, I guess. So I thought we should probably get someone on who's an expert and actually ask them the question, what's happening with crime in New Zealand at the moment? So there you go. I'm throwing you the ball, Trevor, and you can now fill in the blank bits for us to talk about crime in New Zealand. What do we need to know?
Sure. Well, the first thing to know is that the recorded crime stats, the police crime stats, if you like, are simply a snapshot of crime, and they don't actually paint a comprehensive picture of crime per se. Mm-hmm. So they are not a accurate or reliable guide to the total volume of crime which is occurring at any period of time or over any period of time. What they tell us is more about what people are reporting to the police and what police are deciding to record, and therefore the types of offences that find their way into those records, into those crime stats. So on the one hand, the inspector you had on last night is correct. So whenever the crime stats show an increase, it actually is an increase in the number of reports presented to police. Mm-hmm. And then from there, the number of crimes that they actually record. But there's a huge volume of offences that are never reported to the police and therefore never recorded by them and therefore never find their way into that recorded crime statistic. So, like I said, they tell us more about what the police do and what is being reported to the police than they do about crime per se. Now, We have seen a spike in some types of offences over the last couple of years, particularly the retail type crimes, the ram raids and the aggravated robberies of dairies. There's no doubt about that. That's increased. That needs to be offset, though, against a longer term decline in the overall total picture of recorded crime. So, yes, both sides of the argument are right. And that's the problem with recorded crime statistics. They are inherently contestable. So we will get different political parties using the same statistics to paint a different picture. Right. So the Labour government, and it's in their interest, obviously, to talk about how well they've performed and how crime overall is trending downwards. And there are fewer appearances in court, fewer prosecutions, fewer convictions, and therefore a decrease in the prison population. While on the other hand, opposition parties are seizing on these temporary spikes, if you like, and saying, this is a reflection of a very poor performance by the government and that they're soft on crime and so on and so forth. We can't use crime statistics in that way. They are not a reliable yardstick of actually what's going on out there in the community. So I'll give you an example. While there's been an increase in these types of retail crimes, ram raids, dairy robberies, etc., and of course the media jump all over that because that's a story that has lots of legs, and they have lots of opportunities to continue that story and breathe new life into that story every time we hear of another offence. But at the same time, there are other problems, other criminal offendings that are a much bigger problem than that. So we know, for example, that historically sexual violence has been massively underreported. So domestic violence is another example, massively underreported. Online fraud. The consensus now across the world is that this is probably the most frequent type of offence that's committed.
Right.
We don't hear any of the political parties talking about that. And to give the police some credit, they've, put a lot of effort into encouraging victims of both sexual violence and domestic violence to report these victimizations. And of course, as they do, the record of these offences increases. But that doesn't mean to say that there is now a definitive increase in those types of offences, because we still have this very large dark figure of unreported and undetected and therefore unrecorded offences. So the picture gets quite complex. We've had this very large volume of these offences all the time over history, going back a very long period of time. So the crime statistics can't tell us about that. There's a metaphor often used, the iceberg. The recorded crime statistics represent the tip of the iceberg, but that volume of the iceberg, which is hidden from view below the surface, is what we refer to as the dark figure. So is
that volume below the surface getting smaller? We were talking last night, and I think that's what the superintendent said last night as well, about because now there are more ways to report. Yeah. Are there now more crimes being reported? Because I think my co-host Chewy last night said, in the old days, you'd either have to walk down to the police station, phone the local police station, or phone 111, and that was it. Whereas now there's several dozens maybe ways of connecting with the police to report crime. So is that kind of unknown? Is that, if there was a scale, is the percentage of unknown becoming less because there's more ways and easier ways to report crimes in this day and age?
Well, it's very difficult to tell, actually, because we don't know what that total volume of the dark figure is or has been.
You don't know what the unreported crimes are, so you don't know if that unreported crimes are lesser or more.
Yeah, I mean, to use that old cliche, we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
But there are some ways of trying to get at that dark figure, and the New Zealand Crime and Victims Survey is an instrument that tries to do just that. So it will ask its respondents if they've been the victim of a crime, what type of offence was it, and then whether they reported that to the police. And what those surveys have told us over a long period of time in New Zealand and around the world is that they typically capture about 25% of the recorded crime statistics, capture about 25% of those offences reported by victims and reported to the police. So in other words, the police recorded crime statistics represent about 25 to say 30% of offences experienced by victims.
So one
So
in three
that
to
volume,
1 in 3 to 1 in 4. So
yeah.
either 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 4 crimes are not being recorded.
Yeah, and these are the offences
Wow.
that are reported by people responding to the victim survey. And that's a really important part of that survey. And that was one of the reasons they were kind of designed and established in the first place, to try to make some sense of the extent to which police recorded crime statistics represent the actual reality of crime. And of course, they don't. Sure, there's a lot more ways now to report crime, and it's easier, and one would think logically that therefore reporting has increased. But we still don't know, to what extent that is lowering the dark figure, because that's an unknowable figure. And that's the problem with crime statistics. Like I say, they are not a reliable yardstick. People assume, because they see these technical tables full of figures and they're broken down by offense type and they look very objective. People assume that it's much like counting the number of TVs sold every year, or the hours of sunshine, or inches of rainfall, or whatever. It's just not like that.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult to capture that comprehensive measure of crime.
What you're saying is it's not a precise metric. The metric for measuring that is not precise. Like, for example, inches of rain is very precise.
Yeah. So it's, what in criminology, we refer to these types of data as administrative data. So they tell us much more about the organization and what it does and what's being reported to it than it does about crime per se. And that takes us to this inherently contestable situation where we have politicians from different parts of the spectrum using the same statistics or the same administrative data to argue different points of view.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes the saying comes to mind: lies, damn lies, and statistics. That's what I think when you say that.
Yes, absolutely, and that's a quote that I've used in my textbook actually. So
okay,
yeah, they are a good record. The recorded crime stats are a good record of what the police are doing. Who they are proceeding against, the types of offences that they are dealing with on a routine basis, the volume of reports that they receive and record and process. But that's it. They don't tell us about crime per se, because there's such a large dark figure. And at the same time, there's what we refer to as the grey figure. And that's the volume of crime that's reported to the police, but not recorded by them for whatever reason.
I'm interested also to think through what part you think the media has to play with the perception of crime. We talked last night about Bowling for Columbine, and there's a part in that movie where it's revealed that crime was going down in America, violent crime, but the coverage of crime, and it wasn't social media, then it was just the media, had gone up by 600%. So people were feeling less safe, although statistically the country was a safer place from violent crime. What do you think when it looks to either media or social media, and what influence that has on our perception of crime in 2023?
Yeah, well, the media can have a profound impact on people's perceptions because their personal experience is limited. So, we rely on information about, social events, politics, the economy, all of those things. We rely on the media for our information about these things. And that's especially true about crime and antisocial behavior and so on and so forth, because it's so far outside most people's experience that that's the only information that they have to go on. And so if the media is focusing on a particular type of offense or a group of offenders, then we get the perception, or we get the impression, that this is the nature of the problem at the moment.
Yeah.
And I go back to an earlier point I said before. We have huge problems with sexual violence and domestic violence. We have huge problems with fraud. We have huge problems, much bigger problems than crime as it happens, with a range of harms which are not even legally defined as criminal. So environmental degradation, the growing problem of inequalities and inequities, we don't get the media focusing on these things because they are not what the literature refers to as newsworthy. Whereas crime is exciting, titillating, intimidating, and so we enjoy reading about these things. And on that point, it's no surprise that in our popular culture, crime is always up there on the top of the list of popular topics. So crime fiction, police procedurals, they dominate prime time viewing on television. Crime fiction now is one of the number one selling genres in fiction.
Yeah.
And it all plays into that fascination that we have with crime and criminals. The fact that most of them are wildly inaccurate is beside the point. We lap it up and we consume it in ever larger quantities.
Yeah, the idea of if it bleeds, it leads. I've heard that for a very
Absolutely.
long time from the media
Yes.
world. This is now. I guess I'm a little bit stuck still. So let me just repeat something back to you and see if I've got it right. Because with this whole lies, damn lies, and statistics, basically meaning there was I think it's JFK, the Kevin Costner film, who talks about statistics or something, or research or science, and he says, science can prove that an elephant can hang off a cliff with its tail tied to a daisy, but we all know it's not true. In other words, they can manipulate the data to say whatever they want. But what I hear you saying is overall crime is trending down, and there are isolated areas where there's some spikes, like the ram raids, for example. Would that be a fair synopsis as to what you've sort of said?
Yes, I think so. That's pretty much it. So the bigger picture, and again, we're talking about recorded crime statistics here, not crime in total, but the recorded crime statistics generally are trending downwards. If we look at the overall volume of offences captured by those statistics, they are trending downwards generally, but that general trend downwards is punctuated by increases in particular types of offences. And these are the offences which are very likely to be reported. So if your dairy's been burgled or robbed, if there's been a ram raid, these are obviously offences which are going to be reported, if for no other reason, for the insurance claims, because insurance companies demand that you have to report these to the police and have a police case number. So
no, that's a very interesting point. That an obvious place for crime to be reported is one where you have a financial loss, as you say, because of insurance purposes.
Yeah. Whereas sexual violence, domestic violence, some of these, what we call authorized frauds, especially online, these are not reported. The number of romance scams is increasing. The number of phishing scams and people losing money is increasing. People that won't report these for various reasons, but one of them is simply embarrassment that they were had. And so, there's a huge dark figure in that as well. Even though we are making a much greater effort now in New Zealand through CERT NZ and NetSafe and other organisations to try to capture as much of that as possible and try to equip people in terms of their abilities to resist or prevent these types of offences.
There's also that element, and we say this a lot on this show, that your anecdotal evidence, your personal story, your lived experience may not necessarily be representative in the data. If you're someone who's had their shop ram raid, you have a very different perspective on crime overall than someone who's never experienced that. Data is cold, data is calculated, data is unemotional. Your personal story is the opposite of that. It's emotive. It's, for the correct reasons. It has emotion to it. It sells better on 6 o'clock news than the spreadsheet from someone like the Global Peace Index, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. Your perspective has changed profoundly if you've been the victim of a crime, but particularly the victim of a serious crime, whether that's in terms of property and losing money and large amounts of money, or whether it's through some kind of violence. I mean, your view of the world changes. Absolutely. And of course, when we talk about the media lapping these types of stories up, it's very difficult for them to turn recorded crime statistics and the whole complicated story of crime statistics into a readable, attractive format. So that, as you said, the headlines, if it bleeds, it leads. That's typically the pattern that, that's adopted by the media. And you can understand why. They've only got so many column inches, or they've only got so many seconds of broadcasting available to them. And so they have to very much simplify the story. And the story is look at this amazing footage of these cars going through the shopping mall.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I get it. Hey, just finally, and I didn't tell you we were going to ask you about this, but I mentioned the Global Peace Index, and I'll just bring it up for people to show them. Global Peace Index has it has 23 quantitative and qualitative indicators, and puts New Zealand at number 2 on the Global Peace Index for the whole world, behind only Iceland and ahead of everybody else. None of our peers like Australia and the US and UK are even in the top 10. It's all the Scandinavian countries, etc. as well. Is the Global Peace Index, in your opinion, a very good marker of, well, it's a marker of, I think, how safe we are, statistically speaking. Does that therefore also tie into like how quote unquote criminal activity acts in this country as well? Is that a part of this?
Oh, I imagine so. I'm not particularly familiar with that index, but yeah, I imagine it would be. And of course, one of the I think key factors involved there in criminal offending, at least anyway, or community safety, would be firearm related offending, and of course, we only have to look over at the United States to see how terrible the situation can become there with easy availability of firearms. So yeah, I mean, I don't know much about that particular index, but yes, I think it certainly would include crime rates and criminal offending, particularly obviously violent offending.
Yeah, it's you talk about gun violence, and I was just thinking as you were speaking, it's a disgusting thought, to be honest, and I'm glad that no one's doing this. But the Labor government at the moment, if they wanted to be lies, damn lies, and statistics, and use those statistics the way they could have some very interesting social media posts out there at the moment based on the amount of gun violence that's gone down under them because of Christchurch. Which they haven't done, and I'm not suggesting they should, but if they chose to demonstrate how gun violence has gone down under them, they could, using those statistics, which would be repugnant, but they could.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think probably the more important story there is the buyback scheme and how successful that's been, and the extent to which firearms have been removed from the streets. I mean, I don't have the data on that, so I couldn't speak to that in any kind of authoritative way, but it's had an impact for sure. But at the same time, like we just going back to a point we talked earlier on about the National and Act Party talking about the government being soft on crime and how they're going to crack down. If you examine some of the policies that they're suggesting, they're all failures. They've all been tried before. Banning gang patches, military style boot camps, they're failures all around the world. So it sounds great and it sounds like they're tough, but it's just posturing and it's counterproductive in the long term. The Labour government, I think, and along with the Greens, have done a pretty good job in reducing the prison population and in trying to turn the mindset around from this tough on crime, populist punitive approach to one based on evidence and what actually works. And that's what we really have to start emphasizing and supporting. And I think most New Zealanders do support that change in direction. So we want to keep young people out of the system as long as we can. We don't want them to be labeled and then, living up to that label of criminal and kind of, irredeemable. And so the police need to be given some credit for their part they play in this in terms of their alternate supported resolutions framework, the informal ways of responding to offenders. So that's all good. But under these suggestions and policy approaches and policy frameworks of National and NAC, that's just going to take us backwards. And it's going to squander some of the progress we've made over the past 4 or 5 years.
Really interesting points, Trevor. We actually had Chester Burrows on before he passed away, who was the original National Party MP suggesting gang patch bans, and even Chester Burrows in his last 6 months of life was saying, this is ridiculous, it's just headline grabbing. Former national minister was saying this is not going to work. So I hear what you're saying, and we're having these conversations 4 times a week, Trevor. So thank you for being a part of today's conversation. Criminologist from Victoria University, Dr. Trevor Bradley. Thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thanks. Bye.
Okay, team. That's what you heard. That was the situation. So what we've been told is that crime is down. Selected crime has increased, like ram raids and stuff. Does that mean the government is soft on crime? I guess that will be the continuation of the conversation, but that's where we're at the moment with that conversation. While we get a quick chance, this would be where I would normally show all your lovely comments, but of course this is a pre-record tonight, so I apologise that I'm not going to get to put any up. Hopefully you're enjoying it, and if you mention anything in the comments, we'll make sure that they are still there and acknowledge you. I might even be watching by now. I might be home watching the stream with you. Who knows? Let me remind you as well, another way you can support us apart from Patreon is to get involved with our audio podcast. There you go on the bottom of the screen. Every show is turned into an audio podcast. It's available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. If you would consider subscribing, we would appreciate it greatly. In fact, if you consider subscribing to all of our outlets, we're on audio podcast on Apple, preferably. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow me and Chewy on Twitter as well. The links are in the bios for the videos. And we'd appreciate you being on board, and telling people about us is another way you can do it. Now, telling people about us. Last story of the night. Telling people about Ron DeSanctimonious. I love that name. Ron DeSantis' announcement he's going to join in to the GOP primary to compete against Donald Trump. Donald Trump obviously has had meltdowns because he is the most thin-skinned man on the face of the planet. However, when Fox News starts to poke fun at Mr. Sanctus, I have to stop myself from saying sanctimonious now, you know something's kind of going on. I'll play you some audio from the Twitter Space debacle shortly, but even Fox News has come out. This is from Politico, but even Fox News is taking the piss, promising not to crash during a DeSantis interview. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' botched Twitter campaign launch was a subject for some teasing on Fox News on Wednesday night, though the jokes were mainly at Twitter's expense, of course. I can't promise you that I won't crash, but Fox News will not crash during this interview, Fox substitute host Trey Gowdy said to DeSantis during a live interview following the governor's glitchy announcement on Twitter Spaces session. I don't know if that's what's happened with Elon or not. Maybe you just had a big audience, added Gowdy, a Florida Republican member of Congress from South Carolina. We had a huge audience. It did. It was the biggest they'd ever had. And they had to include the word they because actually during part of the Spaces, there was claims made that it was the biggest online audience ever, and it wasn't by a long shot. They had between 300,000 and 500,000, but what it showed us is that Twitter is not capable of holding those kinds of audiences. So the they is Twitter ever had. It did break Twitter Space, and so we're really excited with enthusiasm, DeSantis replied. Now, the job of an announcement of running for president is for people to be talking about your candidacy. The situation to get involved with doing this on Twitter is now everyone's talking about how bad it was, the glitching that happened, and how an embarrassment this was to do it here. So there's a fail already. The other thing to do as a politician is to not give up like fodder to your opponent. Now, this happens in all politics. It's National's job not to create fodder for Labour to use as attack ads. It's Labour's job not to give up fodder to use as attack ads again, by National. This is part of the job of being a politician. And if there's a genuine balls up and people can genuinely use something against you, then that's bad politics. If we can put it that way, bad politics. There's always going to be people spinning things like, I don't know, we just talked about it, the crime numbers that aren't necessarily accurate. But if you make a genuine balls up, it just points to you to being an incompetent person or an incompetent organization. And why would you trust someone who's incompetent or who runs an incompetent group to then run the country? So that's part of the job as a politician, is not to actually get involved. Not get involved, not give your opposition fodder to reach out and get. So fodder there was, shall we say. Fodder there was. Let's have a bit of a listen to some of the situations with the Twitter Space. There were absolutely, without question, glitches from the very, very, very beginning. Have a listen to this. This is the start of the Twitter Space. This is supposed to be announcing a presidential run by Ron DeSantis.
All right, I'm pleased to introduce two individuals who've done more to loosen the...
Oops.
All right, sorry about that. We've got so many people here that I think we are kind of melting.
Now that's not my glitching.
Just
be aware
sign.
of. That's
might
their
have surprised
glitching.
many, but not those of us who've known and worked with Elon for nearly a quarter century.
His commitment to
freedom and his willingness to put his money where
Yikes.
his mouth is,
upset the narrative control.
Let's see. So, we on? Yeah, I think so.
Just to simplify that, there's 382,000 people in the room.
And what you're now hearing is people leaving their mics on, talking about how to solve. That was Elon Musk's voice trying to talk to someone else about how to fix what's going on. So they're leaving their mics open, and we're hearing engineers in the background talking as to how to fix the issue.
All right, great. So let's see. So they just keep crashing, huh?
Yeah, I think we've got just a massive number of people online,
Yeah.
so it's servers are straining somewhat.
And just remember, this is, look, I mean, I could never do what they're doing. Obviously, none of us could. But this is audio only. You know, YouTube, for example, has hosted live streams with literally millions of people watching, and it hasn't crashed. This is audio only, and Twitter Spaces is not capable of doing this. So that bodes the question, why did they do it on Twitter Spaces?
Right, we're just reallocating more server capability to be able to handle the load here. It's really going crazy. So, yeah, I'm obviously very excited to have Governor DeSantis
And then
make this.
it disappeared. It literally crashed out altogether. And Elon Musk's account wasn't able to be used when they relaunched it. So Elon Musk was hosting it. And when he came back, after it crashed, he came back and he couldn't use his own account to host what was going on. He had to use someone else's account to host the spaces. This is what it sounded like. And you'll hear Elon explain this.
All right, I think we're broadcasting. Man, I think we melted the internet there.
Yeah, that was insane. Sorry, we I'm actually doing this from David Sax's Twitter account because
Not his own
looks
Twitter
like
account.
doing it from mine basically broke the Twitter system.
Governor DeSantis, are you there? Can you hear us? I think you broke. All right,
here.
excellent. I know. I think you broke the internet there. We had over 500,000 people in one Twitter space. And
You
it
maybe
was
broke
growing by
Twitter.
like 50,000
It might be fair to say you broke
so,
Twitter, but not the
congrats
internet.
on breaking the internet there.
Well, yeah. I mean, try some new things. You're gonna.
Yes.
It's adventurous. So.
Yes.
But
So
I think the value here is actually really high for people to hear directly from presidential candidates.
Well, and that's actually not wrong. The value is high to hear from presidential candidates. But I've been reading through the media today, and I've read accounts of dozens and dozens and dozens of journalists who couldn't get in to hear it. So there were so many people in there, it crashed the Twitter servers. They didn't break the internet, they broke Twitter. And there was a bunch more people, as Elon Musk just said, who it's important to be able to hear presidential candidates who couldn't hear it because Twitter wasn't up to it. Now, we could be gracious and say Twitter's never tried this before on this scale, and so it didn't work. Fair, right? But we could also say, why is someone using an untested medium for this many people to try and do this? And is this one of those moments where, quote unquote, mainstream media has a strength over somewhere like Twitter? Because as Fox News was poking fun at, they wouldn't crash if he had gone there to make the announcement.
And to answer a Q&A live, and you can get a sense for how a candidate really is, and where it's not just canned speeches and teleprompters.
Well, it's not just canned speeches
in fact, you can tell
and
by
teleprompters.
some of the mistakes that it's real.
Mr. Musk, it's not canned speeches and teleprompters. It's nothing at all. He left after a while. Like DeSantis left and went off and then came back 10 minutes later during his announcement for his presidential run. The other thing that's really important to think about was, remember the criticisms of Twitter, right? And if anyone was going to be positive about Elon Musk, and there have been some people who have given Twitter more credibility of being less partisan, right? But the criticisms of Twitter by some, be they valid or not, what it was is that it was too political and too left-leaning. And then in the very next cycle, Elon Musk hosts a GOP nominee to announce his presidential run. You couldn't get more partisan. You couldn't get someone using Twitter for more of a political purpose for one perspective than doing this. So I don't know what Elon Musk has got planned and what the situation is around what he's doing, but he's just gone from being incredibly critical of Twitter for being too involved with the Democratic Party to hosting a nominee who could be the next president of the United States of America. And I know Trump is the front runner, but it's Trump or DeSantis. He could well be the vice president as well. It's a very bizarre thing. And maybe does it point to the fact that maybe all that Elon has said in the past is not necessarily accurate? Perhaps. I'm not sure. I'll play you this last bit because the other thing that became very awkward about this whole thing is it became an advert for Twitter. Now, unfortunately, Twitter failed in this, but then there was still a bunch of contributors, long and boring contributors. It wasn't a good announcement. It wasn't a good event. If this had been in a stadium, people would have been leaving halfway through. They were there to smoke up Elon's ass. And I also wonder about the idea of a politician now giving perhaps his biggest moment of limelight of the year to Twitter to have a whole bunch of people come on and then basically praise Elon Musk. It's a very bizarre thing. I'm going to play you a little bit of it. How long is the whole thing? It's 2.5 minutes. I may not play all of it, but you'll get the gist as we go through. Let me play some for you.
What made you want to kind of take the chance of doing it this way, as opposed to just doing it on cable news or the usual way?
Well, when COVID hit, I had to make decisions about, do you go with the crowd or do you look at the data yourself and cut against the grain? So when Elon Musk stepped up to purchase Twitter, he paid a lot of money for it. And I'm sure because he's a good businessman, Elon, I'm sure you'll end up making money off it. But bottom line is you had to put your money where your mouth is, because I think you recognize that you can't have a free society unless we have the freedom to debate the most important issues that are affecting our civilization. That did not happen during COVID. The truth was censored repeatedly. And now that Twitter is in the hands of a free speech advocate, that would not be able to happen again on this Twitter platform.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we're absolutely committed to freedom of speech and a level playing field, and just a vigorous debate. And hopefully...
Now, we all know that's bullshit. We all know that's bullshit, eh? Because we've already seen several examples of Elon Musk censoring speech that offended him or that he didn't like. So we all know that that's not true. Yes, we're in agreement? Okay.
This can be a platform that brings people of divergent political views. Yeah, I mean, the amazing thing about Twitter and things like Spaces are that, although I happen to be hosting it, I had to switch over to David hosting it because my account was actually...
There's too much interest.
Because Twitter failed.
My account was breaking the system. But there's really never been a mechanism before where someone could address the nation, or anyone who wanted to listen to them could, from anywhere in the world, United States or anywhere. So I think this is a really profound change.
There's never been a mechanism. There's lots of live streaming platforms you could use. You know, you can live stream on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube. So, I mean, yeah, it's his business. He's beating it up. I get that. But not true.
Whereas with a public digital town square like we have here, it's possible for the public to choose the narrative. It empowers the people instead of a very tiny elite cabal, which I don't recognize the irony of using that phrase.
The irony being a very tiny elite cabal, whilst one person can get together $44 billion to buy Twitter. Like that tiny elite cabal, is that what we're talking about?
But nonetheless, it's true. And you judge by the results.
First of all, let me say a big thank you to Elon Musk for buying Twitter and exposing all of this. By the way, I've never met Elon Musk, but I'm one of your biggest fans. I'm the first congressman to have a Tesla. I'm on Starlink, and I would have bought a Powerwall, but I'm off the grid, and you wouldn't sell me one, so I had to make one with a wrecked Model S.
Elon, if I put down money on January 1st, 2022, that Twitter was going to be the last bastion of free speech on earth, brother, I'd be about as rich as you are on that bet right now. I mean, it's incredible.
And Elon, I have to say thank you for taking the arrows and for unthrottling the accounts of all of us who got in trouble for sharing a New York Post story about a laptop.
So there you go. The very last person talking about, who I think was a congresswoman, talked about, it used to be so partisan. When we tried to talk about Hunter Biden's laptop, we got throttled back whilst they are literally launching a GOP candidate's presidential nomination. They don't see the irony? Good Lord. Hey, that's us for tonight. It's been a pre-recorded show. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Please #share our shit. Want to say once again, and finally, thanks to our patrons for being on board. If you want to come on board and join the team and help us make independent news, visit www.patreon.com/bighairynews. And I look forward to catching you again on Monday night. We'll be back to a normal week of broadcasting. Been a bit different this week because we were in Auckland for a night, and then I'm unavailable tonight because it's a funny thing. You just say family first. I know the concept of family first. It's not always true, is it? Like, I'll tell you a story. This tangent. This is my Chewy tangent. I'm doing a tangent in honor of Chewy. Is when my marriage broke down and I started dating, and you meet people and they say things like, my kids always come first. My kids always come first. You're like, nah, it's not true. And, you know, it's not a bad idea, but it's not a smart way to think about things. And I remember talking to, you know, people that I'd gone out on dates with and saying, well, I understand the concept, but the truth is, let's say that we all went to the beach, me and my kids, you and your kids, and you fell over and broke your leg. Well, actually, in that instance, you come first. Actually, because that's where it needs to be. Yeah, that's where it needs to be. It needs to be focusing on you first. So I understand the concept of family first, or my kids come first, but the truth is people with needs come first. And tonight, I myself have a need to see my kids perform. My kids have a need to have me there. And I think hopefully we've still been able to provide for you what you need, which is some lovely analysis from the left of the political world where we're fair and balanced. Oh, can't say that anymore, can we? Fair and balanced. And bringing you another episode of Big Hairy News. So we'll catch you Monday night. Have a good weekend. Be safe, everybody. We want to see you all back here Monday night from 9 p.m. And until then, we will have to just say anon, hooroo, see you later, so long, sayonara. See you Monday.